Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of Dauntless LeadHERship. Please subscribe, save, send us your comments, and find us wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming somebody who is a longtime friend and has a very impressive background, Miriam Wugmeister. Miriam is the global chair of Morrison Foerster's data, cyber, and privacy practice, and she is considered one of the leading practitioners in privacy and cybersecurity in the world. And I thought that this would be a great time to have a conversation with an expert like her because there is just so much going on in this area. I'm fortunate to have her with us today. Welcome, Miriam.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Lisa.
So, Miriam, obviously, I have so many questions to ask you, but I'll start with what I always start with on the podcast, which is what's your definition of dauntless?
It's an interesting question. So when I think about, being courageous or being dauntless, to me, it's always about speaking truth to power. That to me it sometimes has gotten me into trouble,
Me
but
too, by the way.
yeah, we come from the same cloth on that one. But ultimately, I have to look myself in the mirror, and I have to feel that I am working to make any group of which I am a part better. And so that to me means uh, I have to speak truth to power. And I do sometimes get criticized. If I get criticized for the thing I most get criticized, I guess I should say it that way, is for being too straightforward. I am straightforward to a fault.
Hmm.
It's not going to change anymore, right? It's too late. you know?
But with clients too, you just tell them what they need to hear, not what you think they'd like to hear.
Well, yeah, and I think that so I think that's a big part of my reputation is if you ask me a question, I will give you an answer. That's true of my colleagues, that's true of the people I work, my associates, that's true of my clients. It's true of regulators too. Like if you ask me a question, I will give you an answer. You
Okay.
might not like the answer, but I will tell you what I think.
Well, I'm glad you're here because I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. Miriam and I worked together right out of undergrad. We worked in a financial services consulting firm, and we spent many a late night together making copies and checking data. And
And
what I,
and and adding and subtracting.
oh, that's right. Back in the day. And one of the things I learned about Miriam, beside the fact that she always speaks her mind, is I loved how her mind worked. And when we both went back to school, I headed to get an MBA. She went to get a JD. I knew she was going to do something really important. And I think that she has in many ways, not just in the kind of practice you operate right now, but in the leadership role that you've taken. And I wonder if you could spend a few minutes letting our listeners know how that career journey came about. And you and I talked about cybersecurity and privacy being maybe a women's profession earlier on, and then when it got really important, being less of a women's profession. And how has that happened for you?
Yeah. Well, let me just actually tell you a story before I answer your question, which you
Okay.
can decide if you want to cut or not. Um, when we worked at when we worked together, you may remember that we spent the first 2 weeks literally adding up columns of numbers. And if the difference was positive, we wrote the difference in green. And if the difference was negative, we wrote the difference in red. And we had to make 5 copies of the same documents where we literally added and subtracted. And when we were finished with that, you may remember that I made a proposal. So just think about this. I'm like 3 weeks into a brand new job, my first job out of college. I made a proposal to the chairman of the firm that I did the math and I said, if we did one copy and we sent it outside to have it color copied, this is how much money you would save. And you thought I was going to get fired.
I'm sure I did. Yeah.
But instead, what happened is I got a merit bonus for having been innovative, right?
Hmm.
So I think that kind of set me up on you know, like that was like I am gonna speak truth to power because it was I mean, I tried to frame it in a way that somebody would listen, as opposed to saying this is a terrible waste of our time. But anyway, I just wanted to tell you that story.
Ah, I didn't remember, but I'm so not surprised. And it was a good idea.
Yeah,
Uh,
it was totally a good idea. And we did save the company money. And then we didn't have to do that for 3 weeks in a row, just sitting, adding and subtracting all day long. Um,
well, the thing is, I think I'm a much more courageous person now than I was then. Then I was all about just getting the work done.
yeah,
And it actually didn't even help me so much then. Yes, you always have to get the work
yeah,
done. There's
yeah,
no question. And you have to do it really well. And both you and I were perfectionists about our
right.
work. But then once it's done, having the courage, if you notice something that would make the process better, to speak
Yeah.
up, that's a really big deal. I did not have that early on in my
No,
career.
and the thing is, how do you express, like, I didn't go and just say, this is a ridiculous waste of our time. That would not
Even
have
though
gone
it
over,
was.
even though
Yeah.
it totally
Yeah.
was. And
Yeah.
that's, of course, what was motivating me. But instead, and I think you helped me think about how to frame this so that it might be heard by the people in power, right? The CEO of the company. And so by doing it as a cost savings, that allowed me to
Yeah.
affect positive change, but in a way that didn't make me out as a fetch, right? Like, and so
Yeah.
that was like a really, really important early lesson for me in terms of how to speak up and how to be courageous and how to lead from behind, if you will. But
So Dauntless is not just speaking up, it's speaking up in a way that can influence change and understanding your audience.
that's
And
right.
I think that's Charlie Ellis, who was the chairman at the time, was a very tough guy to
Yeah,
talk to.
right.
And the fact that you were able to break through 3 weeks into the job,
What, a month, I don't know, whatever it was. It was
well,
crazy. My mother told me I was just like
I'm sure I thought that too. That's why I love you. So
Okay,
now,
so now to answer your question
yeah,
about my career path. So I went to law school, and I went to law school because I wanted to ameliorate the working condition of women. Like, that's really why I was motivated to go to law school. So when I graduated and ended up at doing management consulting, I had no idea sort of how I got there, and I thought about I looked at the people who were senior to us, and I thought, I'm not moved by the questions that they are thinking about. These are not the questions that I'm passionate about. And so I remember actually having a conversation with my mom, and
and your
about
mom was in career services.
exactly, and
Yes,
she just
yes,
was brilliant. And
yes.
so, and we talked about, like, what were the things that I found most interesting about our work. And it was really the organizational management issues, the interpersonal issues, like the employment issues. That's the stuff that I found the most interesting. So my mom said to me, what about law school? And I'm like, I don't know about law school. What do I want to be a lawyer for? So she said, I'll take you. So what I decided to do is I had one other job. I went and I was the head of marketing for a computer software company for a year.
I
And
forgot
I
that.
and I and I took the LSAT, that's the exam to get into law school. And I went to law school thinking that I wanted, like I said, I wanted to ameliorate the working condition of women, and I thought that maybe I could do that through employment law. So that's how I got to law school.
By the way, I had an equally irrelevant major to go into management consulting. I was a French literature major.
Right?
And I think back to how did we end up there? And I realized they did not recruit for what did we study? They
No,
recruited for how did we think? And did we think? And that group was a bunch of not financial
no,
majors at all.
right. I mean,
So,
they took a huge risk on the eight of us, right? There were eight
yes,
of us, and we went to different schools. We had different majors. We had very different, like,
yeah.
experience, behind us. And it was a pretty, I mean, I actually am pretty impressed that Greenwich Associates took the chance on the eight of us when we were the first kind of like associate class.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's true. Today's podcast is sponsored by Cited. Do you represent a brand or business wanting to be recommended by AI search like ChatGPT or in AI overviews like Google Gemini? If you're not thinking about this, you should be. Cited's platform can make AI recommend your brand first. Cited helps you show up as the answer to the questions your prospects are asking AI. Find them at youcited.com. That's youcited.com. Or ask me about them. Dauntless is a client too. And of course, if you'd like to sponsor the Dauntless Leadership Podcast in the future, please let me know at lisa-kent.com. We'd love to feature you.
So what happened is I was at Morrison Foerster, and I was in the Palo Alto office for 5 years, and the firm asked me to come and move to the New York office and run the employment practice in the New York office. And that was in late 2000. So if you remember what happened in late 2000, it was exactly, so I gave up all my clients, I gave up my practice, I moved across the country with my husband and my 2 children, just in time for the .com bust. And so I was now in New York with a husband and and my husband sold his business, right?
Oh.
And so, and I thought, and all of our clients, it was just in time for them to fire all their employees and then not pay us. It was, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be eating bologna and like moving in with my mom. Like I thought, what are we going to do? And was very, very complicated. And so there was a person in my firm who had actually negotiated the first agreement between the US and the EU on the sharing of personal information. And she knew everything about the law and everybody who was a player, but she didn't know anything about how to get anything done in a law firm. I knew how to get stuff done in a law firm, and I knew nothing. I knew a little bit about privacy because there are privacy issues in employment. She needed somebody to write a couple memos. I'm like, I'm not doing employment law. So I started working with her. And it was fantastic. Like we were a fantastic pair because like like I said, like I knew how to get stuff done. And then what happened is she died of cancer. She very, very suddenly died. And 3 days before she died, she said to me, it's really important to me that you carry on my practice. So I said, all right, I'll give it a year. I remember at this point, I was probably been a partner for 3 years, 4 years. And I thought for sure the firm would fire me, right? Like she was the one who had all the clients. She was the one who knew everybody. And instead the firm said to me, Miriam, you're going to be the head of the group. I said, you're out of your minds. So, and I said, okay. And I said, I'll give it 1 year. And I worked harder that year than I ever worked. But we didn't lose
hard in a law firm is like not seeing daylight.
Exactly. And remember, I had 2 small children, right? Like and I worked, I think I'm amazed that my marriage survived that year. I mean, I just must have been miserable to be with, but we didn't lose any clients and we just started growing the practice. And we started doing privacy, employee privacy, then consumer privacy, then data security. Now we do AI, we're starting to do quantum, we're doing neural data. Like it's just been this fantastic journey to be doing what I'm doing.
So one of my questions was going to be, was there a woman in your life who mentored you or who had set a role model for you? And it sounds like this person did.
Her name was Barbara Wellberry. Yep.
Barbara. And great that we can celebrate her on this
Yeah.
and that it was a woman. And I wasn't joking when I said, when you and I first reconnected, and it was earlier on in privacy, I felt like privacy was like it wasn't exciting. People weren't thinking about it. And yet here was this woman figuring out how to exchange data between the EU and the US.
Right.
It really was important. But then there were a lot of women attorneys and women in business who went to it. And then as people realized privacy was critical, and as we were all putting more and more out there online to be breached, I think suddenly it became a much more salient topic. And then I noticed that a lot more men were going into the field. And you are here today still leading that group for your law firm. And Did you notice the same thing? Did it get harder? Did it get different? And then I want to talk about how is it today with cybersecurity being
Yeah.
so important and now AI. I have no idea how you protect privacy with AI.
Well, we can talk about all those things. So
Yeah.
just on the gender issue, when I first started doing privacy, it was 90% women because it was either employment lawyers or IP lawyers who kind of got stuck with this new area that nobody knew what to do with. So
Mhm.
it was literally the first privacy conference I went to. It was 90% women, and
And
it was
by the way,
actually
IP, for those who are novices, stands for intellectual property, and it's things like brands and trademarks and things you want to protect.
yeah, exactly. Thank you. And so what happened was, and when I first started doing it, you would sort of say to somebody, "Oh, what do you do?" "I'm a privacy lawyer." They're like, "What is that?" And you'd have to explain, like, privacy is about the collection, use, and sharing of personal information that's aligned with people's expectations and the promises that you make. I literally at every lunch, every cocktail party, I had to explain to my firm. I had to explain what it was that I did. And then it was really actually, it was still predominantly women until the Target breach, and I
Ah,
was the primary outside counsel on that breach,
oh,
and
wow.
that's when my mother finally understood what I did for a living.
Mhm.
Right? That's when she's like,
When was
"Oh,
that?
I get it now."
2000,
Right?
like 10, or when was
Pardon
that?
me?
When was that? 2000,
Yeah.
I don't
I
know.
can't remember. Yeah, a long time
That's
ago.
the first one bit that was
That's
big
the first
enough
one
that
that
we all
everybody knew about, right?
heard about.
Because everybody knew somebody who was impacted. And because, I think actually Target set the standard, with all due respect to myself, right? But it really was Target, right? Like, they notified 70 million people in 4 days. It's amazing what they did. And so that really actually, both professionally and personally, was like a big game changer. It's also then going to, your point about, it's when men started getting interested in the area. I mean, there were always men who were like in the information security side, right? So like on the technical side, but the male lawyers, male business people, male compliance people started being interested in the area really after those significant breaches started happening.
The Target breach, and for again, because a lot of listeners are recent grads and may not even remember it, that was the first time that I remember as a consumer hearing about a company that I really trusted being hacked and losing many, I think it was credit card.
It was
Was
just
it
credit cards. It was just
credit
credit card
card
numbers.
info?
Yep.
Yeah. And subsequent to that, there have been many breaches with lots of big companies. And it's not just credit card info,
No.
it's personal health info, it's school systems with grades and personal IEPs. And
Right.
it's gotten, I think, much worse. But at the time, we thought that that was a terrible thing because back in 2000-ish, when the world was exploding, the dot bomb, I was running a .com, and that was net grosser, and we struggled to convince people back then to put their credit card online. It was, in fact, at the time, something that people were extremely uncomfortable doing.
Yeah.
The genesis of PayPal came because of that. Early Elon Musk, I think, was PayPal. And that was because people wanted to hide their credit card info. So they went through this third party where it was encrypted and nobody could see it. And it wasn't until middle of the 2000s where people started to get comfortable putting their credit card out there online. And then it kind of just was an avalanche. Unrelated to
Do you want
leadership,
another piece of totally just unrelated advice for consumers?
yes.
If you don't need to buy a house or buy a car or rent an apartment in the next 6 months, put a credit freeze on your account. It is the number one way to protect yourself online. I mean, right? Because if you have a credit freeze, somebody goes to open a bank account or somebody goes to rent a house, do something in your name, they go to run a credit check. And if you have a credit freeze, they can't. And so they cannot misuse your information. That's different than credit monitoring, which is after the fact.
And you can unfreeze whenever you want if you
Exactly.
are going to apply for a lease or a
Right.
mortgage or something.
Exactly. You just keep the code, right? Like, so when you do Right, like make sure you keep track of the code to unfreeze.
That's great advice. Do you think now is a particularly dangerous time or just in general?
No, just in general, I'm amazed at how many people don't have credit freezes.
Hmm.
Right?
Do
Because
you have to go to all?
and look, you all have every single person who's listening to this podcast has gotten a letter from somebody telling
Yes,
you that your personal information has been stolen and
yes.
telling you that you can apply for credit monitoring. And there's a sentence in there that says you can also do a credit freeze because it's mandatory. That language is required by a bunch of states to be in there. But we've gotten so inured to getting these notices that we don't even read them anymore. You know the percentage of people who sign up for credit monitoring? It's under 10%.
Really?
Yeah, nobody signs up.
Now you're making me think, and I'm told you I would go off script here, but about the dark web. I watched a podcast about what do you really need to know about the dark web, but I'm
Yep.
curious, do you get involved in understanding and what do we need to know about the dark web? It's very,
So,
just the name is like creepy to me.
so the dark web really means that it's not searchable in the same way, right? But in many ways it acts like the internet that you know. And so bad guys, a lot
Mhm.
exchange information and sell information and do exchange methodologies for how to commit crimes and how to extort people. And in fact, one of the things that so amazed me is like the one of the first times I saw a demonstration, like it's almost like Amazon for crooks. Like
Yeah.
literally you can go onto the dark web and you can say, I want a piece of malware that can be used to encrypt this kind of computer. And like it's for sale and you can click and put it in your shopping cart and you can buy it. Like you do not have to be sophisticated anymore to be a bad guy. Like
Oh
that's
my
one of the things
gosh.
that's like shocking. And then on the dark web, there are people who are selling, you know, I have a million passwords that have been scraped from, this company, right? Or I have I can sell you access to that company. Or here are the social security numbers for, people who are 18, who won't have any bad credit history. Like it's amazing what's for sale. And then of course there's obviously drugs, guns. Like I deal with data, but yeah, you could buy, it's
What
imagine
do
you can
you
figure.
type in? Do you just type in on Google, get me
No,
to
you
the
have
dark
to
web?
know where to go, right? You have
Okay.
to know the address to go. That's the whole point. It's not indexed. That's why it's the dark web, right? Because it's not indexed by like a Google.
Okay. Not that I'm recommending that anybody go on the dark web or do this, but I think it's important to understand.
Right.
And, the more sophisticated the criminal element gets, the more critical what you do is. And so, how are you? It seems overwhelming trying to keep up with these
Yeah.
breaches and the innovation in technology. How do you do it?
Right. If the bad guys are determined enough, they will find a way to get in, either through a technical vulnerability or something, or they'll trick somebody, right? You all know about like phishing,
Phishing.
but
Yeah.
we're starting to see now these very sophisticated groups that are going after like help desks. Like, they'll call up the help desk and they'll say, oh, I'm about to go into a presentation with the CEO and I lost my phone. And can you just please help me? And what's the help desk's job? They're there
Oh,
to help
yeah.
people, right? So it's it's unbelievable social engineering. I mean, I've listened to some of them and I would have given them credit. Like I would have totally done whatever they asked. I mean, it's really, really good. So if the bad guys want to get in, they're going to get in. So then the question is, what can you do to be resilient? What can you do to minimize the amount of damage that the bad guys can do once they get in? Data minimization is a huge kind of basic thing. And because storage is so cheap, we all keep everything, right? We all think, oh, maybe I'm going to need it. But one of the ways organizations can be more resilient is like get rid of stuff you don't need. So
Yeah.
then even if the bad guys get in, okay, maybe they take some stuff, but it's not sensitive. It's not information that's going to harm anybody. It's not, right? Like so there are lots and lots of things that organizations can do to be resilient.
I I feel like there's three things that came out of that. First, I hadn't heard the term data minimization before, and I feel like it applies to us as individuals, just like
Oh,
to
sure.
companies. I hold on to stuff that um, I think we're supposed to keep our tax returns for 7 years or something, or 10 years. But we had a flood, so I didn't have them all. And I was actually glad because, I'm legitimately, they're gone. They were paper and they're gone. Um, but also, recently joined a gym and they asked me for my social. And I said, "Why do you need my social?" And they said, "Well, it's part of the form. You got to fill it out." I said,
Yeah.
"I'm going to give
No.
you my credit card so I can pay. And
Yeah.
here's my application. If you're rejecting it because you don't get my social, let me know." And I never
Right.
heard anything
The
again.
same, the same thing with doctors, right? I
Yeah.
mean, have you ever gone to a doctor's office and they ask you for your social? You
Yeah.
don't need to give your social to your doctor. You have your
Yeah.
insurance. You're like, don't like, I just leave those things blank.
Well, they
And
ask for a copy of your license too. And I think the lesson is at least challenge these things. We, A, probably don't have to give them, and B, we probably don't want these less secure facilities to be holding copies of
right,
them.
right, right.
Right. And
And
you see,
social
they might
security number
just,
in particular, right?
yeah.
Social security number, you're not, I can't remember exactly what the rule is, but there are very, very few instances in the US when you have to provide your social security number. It's a tiny number of things, like when you're paying your taxes, when
Mhm.
you're opening a bank account, but it's very small. It's not when you go to the doctor.
Mhm. Or
It's
the
not when you go
gym.
to the gym.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And
Yeah.
you definitely do not want that stuff. The flip side of that is there have been mega breaches of organizations that amass data, like data brokers, like these huge data aggregators. And so there is a database, in Russia that has all of our social security numbers in
Mhm.
it. Like that's true. It's but
And we just have to hope ours doesn't get pulled or
right,
something.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Or
and
we,
we have to and
yeah.
we have to hope that we do other things, right? We have to hope that our social security number is not being used as authentication, right? So
Mhm.
don't ever use your social security number as your password, for
Yeah.
example, right?
Mhm.
Because your social security number, the bad guys have it if they want it.
Well, I mean, I guess I sort of assumed my social was out there somewhere because it wasn't always that
Yep,
I stood up and said, "No, you can't have it,"
yep,
especially at doctors when I need them.
right.
Um, but you also mentioned resilience, and I think this is something we talk a lot about on this podcast too, is so stuff happens. And part of being a great leader, part of being a good human is figuring out, so now what? Something happened. How do we address it? And I think that that's a lot of what you do is help
Yep,
companies do the next step, the right thing. And you mentioned that Target did the right thing by notifying 70 million people right away. And they did set the standard, right? Because now everybody notifies. Um, but, how do we know what's the right thing and how do you help companies and people
yeah,
be more
yeah.
resilient?
I mean, it's a great question, and when something that I don't think people realize about lawyers is, and certainly lawyers in my space, like whether it's privacy or cyber, I talk about ethics every day, right? So, like when we think about like an organization has had some kind of cybersecurity incident, we always have this conversation. We say, okay, what's the statutory obligation? Like, do I have a legal obligation to give notice? Do I have a contractual obligation to give notice? And even if I don't have a statutory obligation or a contractual obligation, do I have an ethical obligation? Is it the right thing to do? If it were my sister, would I want to know? Right. And that's a big part of what drives organizations. How do I want to be perceived by my customers or by my employees? What do I think is the right thing to do in terms of sharing information and being transparent? And that is a lot of what drives organizations. Um, and I enjoy that part of it, helping organizations navigate that path. Because what you find is that the organizations that are transparent, the first few days suck. I mean, like, let's just be honest, right? It's if you have to call up your customers and tell them that
Yeah.
you lost their data, like it's very traumatic. It's heart wrenching. I mean, if it's individuals, like it's really hard. But if you do it right, your customers remain loyal, right? Like
Mhm.
they do. Like if you if and we We saw that, Lisa, if you remember, in the financial crisis when you and I were working, right?
Mhm.
The financial institutions that called up their clients and said, yeah, the market's turned and we just lost X, did better than the financial houses that, put their head under the desk and didn't, ghosted all their customers, right? Like, so it's the same, right? Like that principle of being transparent, putting yourselves in the shoes of your client or your consumer or your customer or your employee, giving people the information as best you can to let them protect themselves. Like like that's fun legal advice to give.
For people who are thinking about being good leaders and to me, being an ethical leader and not just saying you need to be transparent, but modeling that behavior is really important to being a good leader and a good trainer and teacher. Um, how do you know if you're going into an organization that it's an organization that appreciates that? I mean, maybe looking at how they reacted to situations like
Yeah.
this.
No, it's a really good question because you don't know. I mean, a lot of my clients I know ahead of time before they have a crisis, but sometimes I have clients where I come in when they're already at the crisis level. And you can tell pretty quickly it is absolutely tone from the top.
Yeah,
Um,
interesting.
very, very fast, you pick up on what are the values of that organization and how are those being modeled by the leaders. And it's um, some companies definitely do not appreciate transparency and are not interested in it. And but other organizations are. And so I tell my son that one of the most interesting parts of my job is figuring out how to communicate. Like I know the answer, I know what the law is, but
Hmm.
communicating that in a way that the person is going to listen and hear you. Like it's not advocating in the same way that you think about lawyers advocating, but it's having that EQ to understand what are the things that are going to cause this person to react positively, to take my advice, to not always, right? Like that's one of the benefits of being outside counsel. You give the advice and you're not the one who has to make the decision, which I like.
Hmm.
But if you feel like something is ethical or the right thing to do, how do you express that so you don't sound preachy? You don't sound like you're judging. You don't sound like you're telling them, you're boxing them in. How do you give the advice so that whoever is the person receiving it gets comfortable with that and can I don't want to say it's their idea. I don't mean that, but like can feel empowered as opposed to boxed in. And
Yeah,
that
getting
actually
them
is
to
is
yes.
really is I is that's the tough part of my job.
But I mean, what's interesting is that almost harkens back to your opening story,
Right.
which is that you figuring out what would be a motivating characteristic to suggest something that would get them to
Right.
agree.
So the truth is, Lisa, nothing has changed since we were
Yeah,
22, right?
guess
Like that's
not.
that's the
Only
bottom
the
line.
only the wrinkles. That's it. And now we both have a bunch of kids. So, speaking of kids, and thinking I have a recent grad and thinking about AI, and, I read, oh, AI is killing the job market, or actually, AI has nothing to do with all these layoffs. We'll see that in a few years. Who knows? But I'd like to ask the question generally,
Hmm.
artificial intelligence, do you see it as friend or foe, and why?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated answer. So I am not afraid of change and innovation. When the internet started, everyone's like, okay, there'll be no use for librarians because
Yeah.
we're going to democratize information. And look, the job of a librarian has changed. It is not the same, but it doesn't mean we don't have librarians. Right? Like I do think there are going to be some jobs that go away. I do think many of the rinse and repeat kind of jobs, some of the customer service type jobs, I do think those will start to be and already are being replaced by chat bots and by more automated means for people. Like, so I definitely think um, jobs that are on the lower end of the skill, not that of the skill set and the lower end of the pay. So like people who are in some ways the most vulnerable. I do think a lot of those jobs will go away. And it's many of the jobs actually that have been outsourced, right? So it's many of the big call centers that are in India and Kuala Lumpur and the Philippines, right? Those are a lot of the jobs that I think will be really impacted soon and already are being impacted by AI. For other types of jobs, I think it's going to change it. Like, I'll give you an example. It used to be that clients would come to my practice and say, hey, can you help me write a website privacy policy? Nobody is ever going to come and ask that again. What they're going to do is they're going to go to ChatGPT. They're going to say, please draft me a privacy policy. It's going to be pretty good. Like if you do it, it's actually pretty good. And then they're going to send it to me and they're going to say, can you spend 15 minutes just checking to see if that everything is legally correct? Now, I can do that in 15 minutes because I literally have written 500. So one of the big questions we're having, and I think this is a really important question for every kind of employer, how are you going to educate the next generation? How do you have the ability to edit something in 15 minutes if you haven't done it 500 times, right? So the job of lawyers, the job of marketing people, the job of doctors, it's all going to change, right? It is going to change because AI is going to change the way we consume information, the way we train, the way we gather information. All of that's going to be different with AI. But I don't think those jobs are going away. In some ways, it's the same as like what happened when we didn't have people who bagged groceries in the, when we were young, somebody pumped your gas, somebody bagged your groceries in the grocery store, right? Like, all those jobs have
in
gone
New
away.
Jersey, we still have people who pump your gas. Only state in the nation. It's one of my favorite things about this state, and it's probably going to go away.
Yeah.
So AI, friend or foe, if I pushed you, you would say,
I'd say friend.
okay, I agree actually. Challenge your sources and challenge the status quo. When I train emerging leaders, those are two things you can't really teach somebody. And in your case, challenge the ethics, right? The transparency to do that. But if they have it in them and you can pull it out, I think they are much stronger managers and leaders and much more inspiring. And
I also think just to going back to like you didn't quite ask this question, but like about being a leader, like so like within my own organization.
Yep, that's coming next.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do you want to ask
ahead.
the question?
No, tell me about being a leader in your organization. What have you been able to influence? And do you recommend law and this type of law for
Yeah.
women
So
at this point?
so let me answer the last part first. I think privacy and cyber is a fantastic area for young people because the law is completely changing. I don't have 30 years of case law that you're a young person is never going to catch up to me, right? We're learning it together. The laws are together. The laws are brand new and we're looking at it together and saying, wait a minute, is that a comma or is that a semicolon? Does that change the answer? Like, and I don't have any more skill than the first year associate, right? So it's a fantastic area for young people. It's also super fun for young people, I think, because like you said before, Lisa, the technology is always ahead of the law. So a huge amount of what we're doing is by giving advice by analogy, by what we think the law is going to be, what we've seen in other cases. And so there's a real opportunity for like being creative and like taking lots of dispersed things and figuring out an answer. And guess what? Women are really good at that. So I think it's a great area for women. And one just piece of advice for young women, which is don't ever say, I went to law school because I didn't want to do math, right? Like or like I'm bad at technology. Like, if it's true, which I doubt, but if it's true, then get yourself a book like The Internet for Dummies, right? Or, like you don't have to tell people that. And it's the men. So Barbara Wellberry, the woman who started my practice, who I mentioned before, I'd been doing privacy for about a year. And I said to her, I finally feel like I know what I'm doing. And I was already a partner. And so I'd been practicing law for a long time. And she's like, Miriam, stop being such a girl. Like, of course you know what you're doing. If you were a man, you would have said you were an expert after 3 weeks. And she was 100% right.
And not to disparage men, because there is something really wonderful about having the confidence to say, I got this, even if
Right.
you don't know it
Yep.
yet. And I do think
Yep.
plenty of men I've worked with had that, but I like her comment. And I think that's still true in 2026,
Yeah.
honestly. I
Yeah. Totally
really
true.
do.
Totally true. Yeah. But
You mentioned,
going back to the being the leader,
yeah.
how do you I think such a huge key part of being a good leader is listening, right? Empowering people to tell you to be somebody that they can speak truth to power to you, right? Like giving people the space to tell you what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what their experience is. Like, I think I have pretty good understanding of a lot of the issues that women with children, face in the workplace. You're right. Like, because but there are lots and lots of things I have never experienced. Like, I am white. So like I don't know what it's like to have be racially discriminated against, right? And so you have to be open to hearing those and figuring out how to make people empowered so that they feel like they can share those stories and share those experiences and and grow. And so that's a big part of what I try and do too, is just be open to to criticism, to constructive suggestions, to hearing other people's experiences.
I think, I talk a lot on this podcast about empathy and how important empathy is. And I think that's what you're speaking to, listening and trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. I mean, you and I both have two boys. And this is a podcast that started out for women and women's leadership, but I think boys are facing some tremendous
Yeah.
challenges in the workplace and in becoming leaders now too. So a
Yeah.
lot of this is relevant for everybody, I
Oh,
hope. You mentioned Barbara and her having these connections that you didn't have. You had the technical expertise, she had the connections. And I want to ask about the power of networks. I know in business, networks matter a lot, and often people don't spend enough time developing those networks. How is it in law? And
it's exactly the same, right?
yeah,
I mean, of course, like the bottom line is you have to be a good lawyer. You have to know your area. You have to be a good practitioner. But people hire people they like and people they want to work with and people who, if they had to call you at 11 o'clock at night, they're happy to hear your voice on the other side, right? So it's exactly the same as in business and certainly in private practice. But that's true. But even in like everybody I know who like is in the like public sector, or even in-house, like it's the same, right? You want your colleagues to call you because they feel like you're going to help them solve their problem. And right, you can't be viewed as somebody who's going to be obstructing what it is that, what the process is. You can't be somebody who everyone just thinks is just going to say no. So those networks, whether you're in private practice and the network is the network of clients, but if you're in-house, if you're an in-house lawyer, you also need to have that network of right of like so that people are happy to call you. They will call you. They'll ask you the dumb question, right? Like that's what you want to be, and that's very much about networking.
you made a statement that we want people to be able to come to us. I think that's also the mark of a great leader. And to reassure them that there really is no dumb question. The dumb question is the one you don't ask.
That's right.
Because if you're not learning and you don't have a growth mindset, and God knows in your practice, you got to have a growth mindset because stuff is not staying the same,
No.
then then you're missing out. You're missing out on becoming a better professional, a better person. And so ask the questions. Don't be shy. And if you don't want to ask it within your organization for some reason, find a mentor or trusted expert outside your organization that you can ask. But just ask.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that because there's like, I sometimes joke that when I'm not practicing law, I'm making, I could be a matchmaker, right? Like there's so many people I talk to about what do you want to do next? And,
Mm,
oh, I'm looking for a job and let me make a phone call. And like, that's just the way the world works.
I
And
agree.
particularly for young, like I know a lot of young people who are like, oh, I don't want to impose anybody and I should
Mm.
just be able to get the job on my own merits. And all those things that's all fine and good. But if you have the opportunity to make the connections and to get yourself off the pile, like take advantage of those. Like those are that it really does help.
I agree. And I think that for somebody like you, somebody like me who have stood on other people's shoulders, we want to give back in that way.
That's
It's
right.
not an imposition
No.
to say, I looked on your LinkedIn. I noticed you know this person. Could you introduce me?
Right.
Or, this is a company I'm really interested in, or this is a law firm. I'd really like to make a move into cybersecurity. How do I
Yep.
do it? I mean, I think it's a
Yep.
privilege, not an imposition. And I hope, and everybody who's listening, you'll be able to reach us. Feel free to reach out and ask the question. And if we can help, I know Miriam will, and I will too. And on that note, I will close today by citing the immortal words of my mom, Arlene Barnett, who said, "You don't have to know what you're going to be when you grow up, just what you're going to do next." So thank you, Miriam, for being here today.
Thank you.